Hey, everybody. Mark and I have over 20 years of experience as therapists and as addicts in long-term successful recovery. We know better than anyone what works and what doesn't to break out of porn and sex addiction, heal betrayal trauma, and reclaim your relationship.
And we've poured all of our personal and professional recovery and healing experience into a first-of-its-kind program for addicts, spouses, and couples. We call it Dare to Connect.
At least 4 times every week, we engage with you in real time, in the trenches, giving you the knowledge and the tools to take back your life and relationship.
Whatever else you've done on your journey for healing and recovery, you've never done anything like this.
Mark and I, we've made all the mistakes, so you don't have to. Don't reinvent the wheel.
We all know tomorrow never comes. Look, don't wait one more day to change. Claim your free 2-week trial today at daretoconnectnow.com.
Hey, everybody. I'm Steve Moore.
And I'm Mark Castleman.
We know the pain and heartbreak of porn and sex addiction.
And we know the triumph of breaking completely free.
Every day, we help our clients find hope and healing.
Join us in the fight to take back your life, your marriage, and be stronger than ever.
This is the PBSE Squared podcast.
Hey everybody, Mark and Steve with you here again this week. Today we're going to address an issue that was sent to us by one of our listeners. And by the way, we appreciate all of you out there.
Yes.
You're why we do this. And
Absolutely.
Steve and I talk about all of you all the time, and really ponder and quite frankly try to get some inspiration from higher power and really take this serious. So we appreciate all of you. Thank you for listening in and giving us such great meaning behind doing this.
Amen to that.
So here's the message. Hi guys, would it be possible to talk about entitlement in an episode? I feel like many men struggle with a sense of entitlement for sexual pleasure and or being serviced, in quotes. I know from my husband and many of his friends, the belief is that if they aren't getting it from their wives, they have the right to seek it elsewhere, such as in pornography, affairs, etc. How does someone work on changing their mindset of entitlement and seeing how it affects a relationship on so many levels?
This is a very small, innocuous topic.
Oh no,
require a lot of coverage.
Steve and I never talk about this. This is very foreign to us. Anyway, you can hear the sarcasm just sort of pouring out here. We talk about this all the time, and it's something that we're very, very aware of from our own addiction years. It's something that we both struggled with in our marriages at various levels. We'll talk about that in a second. So let's just jump into this right away. So I got to tell a story. When I was married, I'm at my reception, and all of my extended family were there. And a lot of these people were from some very small rural towns in the US. And I had a great uncle, and he came up to me and he pulled me aside during the reception, and he wanted to give me some marital advice.
Oh boy.
And you can just think what was going through my head. I'm just, oh my gosh, what is this going to be about, right? So here's what he says to me. He says, from all my years of marriage, there's something I've found that can really help your relationship. About once a week, I find it's usually needed about once a week or maybe every couple of weeks. You need to get a good switch from the backyard off of your tree, and you need to take it to your wife.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, I was stupefied. I just sat there. I tried to be nice. If it was me today, oh man, he would have gotten an earful, let me tell you. But
holy crap, yeah.
I was very young, in my 20s, and so that was the advice from the great uncle about having a happy marriage.
Yeah.
And the crazy thing, as crazy as that sounds, is if we look at it, we find that that generation, my parents' generation, even some of my generation, have continued in some ways to have that kind of attitude, right? Where the woman is
Mm-hmm.
subservient, the man is in charge,
Mm.
right? She services him, she meets his needs. Steve and I were talking before the podcast about some of the old magazine ads back from the 1950s, where it shows the woman and she's in her evening gown, she's got pearls on, she's pushing a vacuum, she's got dinner cooking on the stove, and she's greeting her husband that has come home from work and gets his settled in his easy chair with his slippers and his newspaper. And it has some caption about,
Oh,
you know,
jeez.
make your man happy, and I don't know, it's a
Oh.
vacuum advertisement or a new cookware set or whatever. And I remember seeing those ads and they just blew my mind. I'm like, really?
It's like nails on a friggin' chalkboard, man.
Oh
It's
my
just the worst.
gosh.
Yeah.
So those were more blatant, but the thing that we find today, and I know as I look back in my addiction years, I didn't go to that place. I had more respect for my wife than that, but I still did have cultural issues. Certainly, the influence of pornography, big, big, big. It did seep into my relationship, and
Yeah.
I found that there were ways that I would subtly. I thought it was subtle. Try to maneuver my wife into a place where I knew that the hope that the end result would be sex. So why is Mark vacuuming the entire house? Oh well, sweetheart, it's because I love you, and I just saw that I saw the carpet was a little dirty, and started to vacuum, and then saw the whole house needed it, and it's just because I'm such an awesome guy. I just wanted to help out. Well, not the whole truth. Of course, I wanted to help out, but in the back of my mind is, if I do this and I'm real nice and help out a lot, then tonight there might be this result. And I found myself doing a fair amount of that, trying to maneuver, trying to manipulate a bit.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I don't think in my case, it was really blatant or you know, um, openly abusive, but is definitely agenda behind all of it. And now here's the really telling part. If all of that was done, and then we get to that place, in the bedroom at night, and either my wife wasn't feeling well or things had gotten too late and it didn't end up in that result. Now the addict mark came out, right?
Pouty
And
Mark.
the pouty mark, the resentful mark, the angry mark, the mark that would move over to his side of the bed and turn his back to her and just fume and just steam, for probably an hour before I could go to sleep. I was just mad. And that's a really telling sign. And we're not going to get into all that in this podcast, but you want to gauge where your agenda is and your true intention. Just look at your behaviors, your thoughts, your emotions, as in that scenario. So that happened a lot. There were times where, yep, moody Mark, pouty Mark. So that's kind of my just a couple of stories of hundreds that I could tell. And I know
Yeah.
you've got a few of those yourself, Steve.
Yeah, and for sake of time, I won't go through them all, but I'll just say that it's too bad that Pouty Steve didn't know Pouty Mark back then, because we could have been Pouty BFFs. Would have been great.
Yeah, we had pity parties all the
Oh
time.
yeah, man, could have thrown some killer victim pity parties. 'Cause I very much resonate with that. Yeah, for myself as well. As I look back on my history with this topic in my marriage, I would say that there was a form of entitlement, definitely, as a Mark indicated. It was probably along a more subtle line as well, than the blatant 1930s magazine Mark was describing. But there was a pressure, I think, that I put on my marriage at times, probably more than I even realize, if I was to bring my wife in here and ask, where I wasn't intentionally trying to push for sex, but kind of like how you talked about, Mark, my response to not getting it was so negative,
Hmm.
right? That it kind of set the stage for, a wife having to sort of choose between the two. And I think a lot of that stemmed from, for me, I mean, even though it manifested as a lot of entitlement, I think where it came from just as much, and I think for a lot of the men that you and I work with, probably the majority who struggle with this, that oftentimes stems from an incorrect definition of what a marriage looks like, but specifically what love within a marriage looks like.
Hmm.
One of the great lies, and there are many that, and we talk about this all the time, that pornography tells us is that sex is love. Sex is the sole gauge by which you gauge a relationship or an interaction with another person. Everything is broken down into body parts and positions and breast size and every other thing under the sun. And we strip away all the humanity and all the other 15 ways in which we connect with one another, and we place the focus squarely on the physical act, right? Having the greatest orgasm, having the greatest this, having the greatest that, and that's how we tend to gauge it. And I think that is one of the main culprits that bleeds into this line of thinking, where if I'm not either getting sex at all, or in order to be loved, I need sex, or I need sex, on a certain frequency level or a certain amount of the time, or certain types of sex, because there's a lot in that regard. I think a lot of it stems from that idea. Underneath all of that, as with many sides of the addiction, I think in many cases there's that cultural underpinning that's playing a role that causes lots of guys to look at it through the lens of, if my wife's not being sexual with me, she must not love me, right? She must not care. She must not be invested in us. We might be in real trouble. So
Yeah.
that's I think probably point number one to cover.
And I think that's a great point, because as I look back on my experience back in those years, that was definitely true. I gauged a lot of whether my wife accepted me, valued me, desired me, my worth, my status as a man, was whether or not she wanted to have regular sex with me. And
Yes,
those two things were intertwined, the
totally.
sex and my esteem. And I did not know how to separate them. Right. So
Yes.
sex equaled love.
Yeah, and I think where we make that mistake too is we like you said, when sex becomes tied to our self-worth or our value, right, as a person, as an individual, right there we've just sown the seeds for codependency on sex in some form, right? Be it
Yes.
addiction or something else. Because if I need sex to be happy, now I'm a slave to it, right? If that paradigm is actually true. What we have seen, what Mark and I have seen, and the paradigm we come from, and we say this as professionals, but as addicts as well, is that sex is not a requirement to be personally happy. It can be a huge tool in connecting a marriage and in building and in deepening a relationship, for sure. And it has a huge role in those things, probably a far bigger role than many of us conservative religious folk were raised with, to understand. But by the same token, it is just one of many ways where love can be reflected in a marriage, and it cannot ever become a baseline requirement for my own personal happiness. If I was to quote a Disney movie, it's a quote that I borrowed from a Disney movie actually about this. It's
Wait,
from
Cool Runnings, right?
no, The Sandlot.
Oh, The Sandlot.
Sandlot. It's when crap. Am I crossing like copyright boundaries now? I
I
don't
don't
know.
know. It's
It's when
okay.
it's when Babe Ruth appears to the main character, and he says a key phrase in the movie. It's my favorite scene in there, but it applies to concepts like this. He says, it's if you're not. Oh no, you're right. It is Cool
It's
Runnings.
Cool
My bad.
Runnings. That's
Sorry,
what.
scrap that. It's Cool Runnings. I'm wrong. But yeah, it's a John Candy, and he's talking about the need to win. And he says the following. He says, if you're not enough without it, you'll never be enough with it, meaning the gold medal.
Yep.
And it's a great perspective. It perfectly exemplifies how Mark and I, and I think any solid professional in this industry would approach that topic. Sex can be a huge benefit and blessing to my life. It cannot be a requirement for happiness. If I am going to be able to operate healthy and independently, and to show up in a relationship as a whole individual, the way that we talk about on this podcast all the time.
Yeah. And we had a podcast a while back, and we'll reference it here, where we talked about this concept of needing. Am I needy in the relationship, right? Do I need you? Do I need sex with you? Do I need certain things to happen?
Yes.
Or are we choosing each other?
Mm-hmm.
Because we can need lots of things, and we can go, frankly, get those just pure base needs met in many ways. And we're not going to talk about those, because that's what addiction is all about. But
Well,
we're
and then there's
not
that whole
choosing.
Yes. Well, and needing, the degree to which we need diminishes the degree to which we choose.
Yes.
And that's all I'm going to say about that. We specifically said Mark was going to cover that in the podcast because this is like one of my big soapbox topics that'll just take us
Well,
everywhere.
we're going to reference you back to an episode that we did called "Letting Go of the Sexual Beast."
Yes.
It's episode number 25, and we talk in depth about this concept. So if you're wondering about this needing versus choosing, and how it applies to what we're talking about today, go back and listen to that because
Absolutely.
it's excellent. Hey everybody, Mark and Steve here. Are you looking to take your recovery and your marriage to the next level?
We work with individuals and couples one-on-one.
With both in-person and online therapy options, you have access to the experts anytime, anywhere.
To learn more, visit us at pbsepodcast.com.
So let's jump quick now into what to do. So if we want to come out of this place of entitlement, this kind of old paradigm of the woman servicing the man and all these expectations that have been present in our culture, how do we do that? And for me, it has to start with willingness. And this is a pretty tough part because I struggled with this, a willingness to begin challenging my paradigms.
Yes.
Right? Sacred beliefs and sacred things that I thought at that point in time couldn't change. Nope, this is just the way it is. And if you're going to try to talk me out of it, I'm not going to listen to you because I need what I need.
Mm-hmm.
And I was very closed off to this. Like, what do you mean I can be happy without sex? Are you crazy? Yeah. And, I've come a long way in my recovery to realize that is absolutely true. And in fact, for me personally, it must be true if I am going to pursue true happiness. If I have to have sex to be happy, then my path to real happiness has been shut off because there's an external factor that's controlling it. It's acting on me instead of me acting upon it.
Totally. Well, and you're right. I mean, and this is a common theme, right? Willingness is the catalyst for any effective change. And we're going to talk about how that plays a role in these other points we're going to make in just a second. But absolutely, if there's not an openness to something new, to something different, to some sort of a change, then change is very difficult to effect. In fact, I'd say it's probably impossible. And while we're talking about this level of willingness, it is critical that if we're going to have this discussion and address our listeners' question, this mindset of entitlement, the quote from that letter was, how does someone work on changing their mindset of entitlement and seeing how it affects a relationship on so many levels? We're going to start with an unfortunate but true truth we bring up from time to time here, so we're all on the same page. We both partners in a relationship have to let go of the other person's recovery if there is, and the choices that they make associated with it. As we talk about all the time, there are always three recoveries going on: him, hers, and ours, right? So we've got three recoveries happening, and those operate independently of each other, with the marital recovery being kind of an amalgam of the other two for the most part. And even though the marriage does require specific things and specific needs, recovery always has to go back to what is my sphere of influence, right, in this situation. And always that constant recognition that my partner is a sovereign, independent individual who has the right and the obligation to make their own choices and their own decisions. And any effort that or emotional energy that I expend towards trying to change him or to change her is wasted and is lost where it could have been used in other areas of recovery. So it's important, I think, set that groundwork.
Yeah, that's a really important point. And of course, having introduced that point, now you've opened up the floodgates on one of our other favorite topics, which is establishing and holding boundaries.
Yes.
Because so listeners might say, well, if he's in charge of his own approach to all of this, then what on earth am I supposed to do about it? If he decides he doesn't want to change it, or he's going to continue to be entitled and, try to manipulate me into sex, etc., then I can't do anything.
Yeah.
Well, the thing you can do is boundaries.
Yes.
And we've talked about that a lot. In fact, we're going to refer you back to another episode that we did. It's called Boundaried Relationships Last. And that was episode number 27. And that we go into great depth on how to set and hold these boundaries. But that's the only power that we have in these relationships, is working on this, is our own healing and recovery, and then setting boundaries around that healing and recovery for what needs to take place for us to progress.
Yes. Well, and I think along with that, right, boundaries, just to pull one piece from that podcast episode and others that we've talked about boundaries in many cases on here, but one key reference to boundaries is they have nothing to do by definition with changing the other person or the other people involved in the situation. They have everything to do with protecting whatever the boundaries are being set around, right?
Yep.
Be it the marriage, be it the self, et cetera, et cetera. And so boundaries are not about changing behavior in others. They're about maintaining our own inner integrity, allowing us to stay authentic, right? Allowing a wife in this case to be able to show up authentically sexually, right? To be there because she wants to be, not because of some outside pressure or influence or manipulation or anything like that, right?
Yeah.
And kind of tied to that, right, is the authentic side for a man. To all of you men out there, or I guess our addict listeners, that's kind of how we commonly refer to it as. For all of our addicts out there, you really have to ask yourself, authentically. This goes back to that definition of love. What kind of sex do I want to have authentically, right? Do I want to have sex, or do I want to have intimacy? Do I want to have real connection, or do I just want to have the physical act? And I pose that to guys all the time in my groups. We'll ask that question, what would you rather have? Regular, frequent, all the time sex where your spouse is, more or less just kind of goes with the flow and just says, kind of, I'm here and whatever, and let me know when you're finished, not to be crass, versus somebody who is there because they want to be there, because they want to express that passion and that love that they have for you. Not tied down, not because they're pressured or they're guilt tripped or they're cajoled. Now, only a guy can decide that, I think. But you have to make that decision about what kind of relationship you're wanting, as does a spouse. But if we're addressing that entitlement piece, I think it's important that we set those ground rules and recognize that any entitlement in a relationship, and on any level, I would argue there is a form of manipulation linked to that in some form or fashion, regardless of your situation.
Yeah. And I love that point about us as guys deciding, what role do I want sex to play in this relationship? Do I want real love, deep, committed, intimate love, or just the sex act in order to satisfy the need that I feel that I have? And as you mentioned that, we're of course avid Christians in our personal faith. And what comes to my mind as you say that is this definition of love, that Paul talked about in the New Testament.
Yes.
And I actually pulled something up here on my screen. This is the New International Version of the New Testament, if you're wondering where it comes from. But he says, love is patient, love is kind. It does not envy, it does not boast, it is not proud, it does not dishonor others, it is not self-seeking, and it is not easily angered. It keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, and always perseveres. Love never fails.
Love that. Absolutely love that. And I think that there is so much truth to that. And when you compare what you just read, right, versus all of these other reasons, right? And again, we really empathize with you addicts. We get you probably better than just about anyone can. We know that the denial and these thinking errors and the way we were brought up, these all run really deep, and it takes time to change these paradigms, because recovery does turn a lot of topics about a marriage and a relationship and how connection works and all those things on its head. But both of us can tell you from personal experience, we have talked about this at length, Mark and I. I would tell you, as a guy in recovery, answering my question from before, I would rather have sex once a year with my wife if that meant that was a passionate, connecting experience where both of us were there because we wanted to be, because we were choosing that over all that previous acting out and all those other ways in which that used to occur. Because I think for a guy in recovery who is living a connected lifestyle and who is getting more in tune with his authentic self, that other kind of sex, in my experience with hundreds of clients over the years, it always rings hollow at the end of the day.
Yeah, it always leaves you wanting,
Yes.
just like a porn viewing session, coupled with masturbation, and it's done, and you find yourself more disconnected and empty than you were before. And then the addict brain goes seeking it again, because this time it will fulfill everything that I need, but it just leaves you more empty every time. Whereas what we're talking about with true connection and deep intimacy, I think of that part of my marriage relationship now, not as a be all end all, not
Yes.
as something that I must have in order to be, happy or fulfilled or what have you. It's a celebration. It's a culmination of all the other awesome things that my wife and I are trying to do to connect with each other.
Yep.
This is just part of that. And it's this beautiful coming together to say, wow, look at all the hard work we're doing. Look at how much we've been trying and all the ways we've been connecting. And this is just is a culmination of that. Isn't that awesome? But without all the rest, without all the rest of that we're working on and doing together, it's truly just a hollow physical, body parts experience. That's really all that it is.
Yes.
And that just left me in a really deprived state, an empty state where I just couldn't fill it. It was just a
Yeah.
constant hole. And it's what kept me stuck in addiction, thinking that was going to be the thing. Great
Yes.
sex is going to solve it. That's what I need. That's the whole answer. Oh
Absolutely.
man, did I come to realize how far off base that was.
For sure. Well, and I know as we wrap up here, we want to make it clear at the end of the day that the liberating piece that we always want our listeners to walk away from these podcasts is that you are in the driver's seat with your relationship.
Yep.
Mark and I are here to share experience, strength, and hope from our own recoveries, from working with thousands of people now all over the globe, in different respects and in different regards. But at the end of the day, your marriage is your marriage. And so we're going to give you an assignment around that. Your relationship is your relationship. So first part of the assignment is we're going to have both of you sit down, both the addict as well as the spouse, sit down and write out individually and really give some time pondering how do you define love now? Not necessarily how you'd like it to. That's the second part, but how are you defining it now? What elements, what attributes, what activities like sex or other things are being linked directly to that need for love, right? And what things might wrap into that. Second part of the assignment is going to be taking those things, or taking that list, you will, or that work, and then coming together as a couple and being able to say, what do we want this marriage to look like? What kind of loving relationship do we want to have here? How do we want to define it? Because at the end of the day, that it's a relationship. The good relationships are always about collaboration and connecting on that level. So that's I think where we would have you go this week, and a great starting point. Anything you'd add to that, Mark?
Yeah, and I think as you sit down to talk together about what you want love to look like in your relationship, the sexual and every kind of love, I'd also encourage you to be daring enough to actually talk about and put on the table things that you can start to admit that perhaps you might need to let go of.
Yes.
Different paradigms, belief systems, things that were modeled to you as you were a kid growing up, what your culture taught you. Are there certain things that maybe you just need to let go of them? It's kind of what we call fire and hire. Is it time to fire some of those old things that are just not achieving in your relationship what you desire, and it's time to let them go and
Yeah.
to adopt new approaches, new mindsets, new belief systems. That's a really hard thing. I'm going to tell you, that was one of the toughest things that I did, my wife and I did, and we're still working on it
Mm-hmm.
because we have all kinds of stuff that's in there that we've carried with us, from our families, our culture, our religions, our time together. And you got to get real. And are you willing to put stuff on the sacrificial block, and bring down the guillotine on it, so to speak, so that you can adopt other things to move forward?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Well, guys, as always, we appreciate everybody listening, and we really do love our listeners and all of you for your desire to change, to be better, to grow, and to make your marriages and your relationships the best that they can be, and to live more connectedly, and to be free of these other elements of life that only bog down and disrupt those things. So, thanks again for everybody for listening, and we hope you have a great week.
We'll see you next time.
Bye-bye.
That's all for today. Thanks for joining us. And remember, the opposite of addiction isn't sobriety, it's connection. Together, we can do the impossible.
To learn more about Mark and Steve and to listen to more podcast episodes, visit us at pbsepodcast.com. Everything expressed on the PBSE podcast are the opinions of the hosts and the participants and is for informational and educational purposes only. This podcast should not be considered mental health therapy or as a substitute thereof. It is strongly recommended that you seek out the clinical guidance of an individual qualified mental health professional. If you're experiencing thoughts of suicide, self-harm, or a desire to harm others, please dial 911 or go to your nearest emergency room.